What's going on, guys? I wanted to talk about the evolution and issues with LCS roster building throughout the years, starting from the very beginning. Reason why I kind of wanted to get into this is mostly because, well, you know, there's quite a few general managers in the LCS scene, better for worse. Either, in their previous years, they've done some pretty questionable and bad things towards younger players that kind of prevented them from being able to advance to the next level, or it's happening even now, like with, for instance, with XQ on Dignitas, whether you want to say that he's good enough or not good enough. The fact that they instantly flipped him out to grab up Spica, who had two terrible past years, and honestly, hopefully he's just getting minimum because, yeah, like he doesn't deserve any more than that, but they went with that route, right? And now we have, well, I mean, it's just, these just kind of things happen all the time, especially with players just kind of fading away because they never get an opportunity or they have a terrible contract, whatever it is. And, yeah, like I just really wanted to get into this and just talk about it a bit. So back in 2013, when LCS first started, this is after all those third-party tournaments like PAX East and whatever, really big moments that happened that got everyone really excited about LCS. They had like 400,000 plus viewers. I mean, still remembering CLG versus TSM, where Nien is playing like Elise. Like, man, that stuff was amazing to watch. And what you see is going to be kind of reflected in what the early years were all about. Though keep in mind, it's quite different from current age. So, for 2013, there was no structure really. There was no coaches, right? It was all players who were creating these teams and setting them up. They got sponsorships, whatever, but it was like literally there's like an individual or two that were really like handling things, and that made things pretty difficult overall for just the sake of, having moderated content and whatever pushed out. Granted, the drama that we got from those situations and pretty much what you would call grassroots was incredibly interesting to watch because it was so unfiltered, right? With like TSM Snapdragon vlogs, like you would get to see so much that you should never see, and that drew people in. Granted, it definitely created villains and was not the best thing to do in the end, but like I said, it was good. And so like you had guys like Scara, you guys had like on TSM, literally almost every single player on this team was like a big thing for the most part, particularly Dyrus, Odd One, Reginald, Wild Turtle to a degree. I'm a Cutie Pie, Kiwi Kid, Voy Boy. There were so many great names that you can see here: Hotshot, GG, Double Lift, like Big Fat LP, Chowster, whatever. So we had all these players, and the number one thing you're going to notice is, one, there's not a ton of imports. That's the first thing you're going to notice. And but more importantly, what they really based the rosters on at this time was being, honestly, partially being friends, people you liked, and really just whatever the players thought was good at the time. So basically, it was a lot on their synergy and just their own individual perceptions versus some of their deep scouting. Like that just wasn't very so apparent, was having deep scouting. It was just more like, well, I think Wild Turtle was really good, by the way, when we watch him. And they pick him up and they test him, and then that's it. That's literally it. And it just turns out really great. Like it was just a great pickup in the end of the day, we all remember Cutie Kid, Scar, Cutie Pie, like vibing really well together. Like the vibes were a literal thing. If you look at CLG, one of the big issues that they had was that while the players did vibe in a way, like Double Lift, Chowster, even Hotshot GG to a degree, Big Fat LP, like these guys like argued with each other, right? Like they created something very chaotic, which in the end, that's where having a coach would have been really necessary for a roster like this to make it work. And the chaotic could not turn into enough good, so they didn't really turn out that well in the end of the day. But it was an approach, right? And then of course you have other rosters that were just kind of like just thrown together. We had Team Vulcan who came in at this point. That was just kind of like a huge surprise. Again, a team of players who just like everyone kind of vibed with each other and they ran with it and they got top 3. Like that was amazing. Like that doesn't happen so often now in our current day and age, but at the time, what you're going to notice in these early years is, yeah, synergy, liking each other, like the vibes. Like a lot of this was really important to these rosters to actually function. You go to 2014, and this is when things start breaking apart a little bit, and when LCS starts making some changes. Now, the big thing is that there's three big things to note here. One, Cloud9 comes into the league. Cloud9 was, of course, spectacular, right? They also, just to say this right now, they did come into the league in summer 2013. But it's really seen this like continue on going into 2014 that really solidified it. That like, wow, okay, so like again, we can see, natural talent, players who really vibe and work well together, excel. Okay, great. So that's a really good indication. We have Team Curse who revamped a little bit and they threw in Quas. Okay, Dignitas, a little bit. They threw Kiwi Kid. Kiwi Kid was top lane, right? Yeah, they threw Kiwi Kid into support here. Kept the vibes. Didn't do too bad. TSM, they brought in the first big time import, Bjergsen, right? And so with Bjergsen, yeah, he definitely changed the scope of what people realize, like how good could players really be, because nobody was almost as close to being as good as Bjergsen. Yes, Developed was very good at the time, but he just did not have the team, right? Bjergsen, that was just, it really did make you say, wow, I wonder what else is out there that you could actually fit into LCS and just like make us like an instantly like top tier team. Because yeah, like it was hard for people to match him. And another thing that really worked well at this time, again, remember vibes, like how you like your teammates, how you function together. While this is important in the current age, at this point, like it was like, that was like very important because you just did not have the structure to curve out if it didn't work, right? Like there wasn't a lot of great systems to be put in place in cases where things fall apart. So you had to especially make sure that was good to go. Bjergsen joined a team that had Odd1, Dyrus, Wild Turtle, and Xpecial. Now, Reginald was the big, like, I'm gonna like say some shit to your face and like a lot of confrontation. The other players are not like, even though like I'm sure like behind the scenes there are things that they say to each other, but from the outlooks, like from the outside perspective and how these guys function, was probably one of the best teams he could have joined. Because Bjergsen at this time was not a, how would I say it? He was a shy gamer, wasn't a big leader. I don't even know if he was a big voice, but coming from Copenhagen Wolves, from EU into North America like that, it's not easy. So the fact that he had a team that actually would function well and not like kind of constantly harass him over things, like put pressure on him constantly, that was really great for him. Like this was actually like literally, I don't think like, and then keep in mind, I don't think some of these teams really knew how well their players were going to function around each other. I really don't think that was like a big focus. I really think it was just, this guy's incredibly good, we need to get him, and that was about it. Because, if, like I said, if this was Bjergsen joining CLG, with the way some other players are, I don't think this would have been good. Like, easily Bjergsen could have gone a wrong turn from having, like, the wrong roster, and yeah, he still would be really good, but maybe, like, his skills would look a lot worse. Like, that was the case with Vikla on FlyQuest. That was just, it just did not have the right players, even though it was a really great roster on paper. It was just not the right personalities that would let Vikla kind of really push his limits and like potential forward without having like some of those like dampening things, right? And that is gonna be my first rule I create, and like I guess my first and second rule I create when it comes to talking about the rosters across the years. One, is this player's personality actually the right fit and going to work with what we have, right? And then two, just because a player, is incredibly good somewhere else doesn't mean they're going to be incredibly good in your league on your team, right? Both of these kind of work well together, because in the end of the day, there's a ton of cases where like a great player comes over, like look at Bang. Like Bang came over to 100 Thieves and it turned out like shit. So it's something you have to really be mindful of when you're actually creating rosters, which I feel like Some teams are lucky and some teams are not. Look at CLG. You know, they still didn't really fix their whole issues with, like, you know, their constant bickering and whatever. And even though they have some good players, it just was not enough. We have other teams that are kind of like did some weird stuff, probably not worth mentioning. LMQ, you know, they joined LCS and instantly got top 3. And so now you have Bjergsen, who joined. That's a big thing. Okay, maybe we need to just do imports because holy shit, this is super good. The MQ team joined, not even the best LPL players or best Chinese players you could possibly get. And they already got top 3 in your league. That's pretty bad. But here's the thing. Even though it looks bad that the fact that LMQ could just join and instantly get top 3, people again assumed that we had to instantly import when the reality is that they were 5 like players who knew how to talk to each other. Like, in the end of the day, they knew how to communicate with each other, and it was just like a set of 5 different players. But yeah, they can talk. If you bring 2 players who can't like communicate with your 3 other players, it's not going to be the same thing. So communication is the third thing that like comes up, this third rule. We're like, oh, this is like where we're going to make a mistake, because if these guys can't talk and they're like actually like, let's say like they actually talk a lot normally in their language, whether it's Korean, Chinese, whatever, and suddenly you can't do that, you lose a ton of your presence and just general like strength as a player. Like, there are definitely players who are just good at discussing the game, and well, I don't know what to say. Like, if you're gonna pick a player up who does that and then he can't talk to the rest of your guys, you really messed up. You go into 2015, you know, C9 keeps it up still, great. You know, I love that they actually continue to go with it, but eventually it fell through. But here's the thing. It was not because the idea of a North American roster is bad. It was just that the players didn't try hard enough. You know, Balls has always been known to not be a huge grinder. Same with Lemon Nation. And I feel like with the amount of success they have and everything, I feel like these guys just kind of stopped trying to improve and have that relentless effort. And that's why it failed. I think Cloud9 was a great example of a team that, with great synergy, you know, and reasonable players, like, you can really make a big dent in LCS and improve. But they didn't see it that way. They didn't see it that way. They saw it as like, these guys are just not good enough. It has nothing to do with the effort or anything like that. We need to just import and get someone who's just clearly like just way better, right? And that's probably, I can't remember what the 2016 roster is, but we'll look into it right out, like once we're done with this. For CLG, they brought in Xmithy, so a guy who actually is pretty calm. He's kind of a commander-like jungler who will talk a lot, make calls, play calls, and kind of guide people, and that was really great. But they still had a bunch of issues surrounding Doublelift, Afro, and Link. So again, CLG, they're taking a really long time to figure out their issues, their personality issues, rule number 1. But they're slowly getting there. Gravity, you know, actually, wait, was it this roster? Oh yeah. Sorry. CLG roster did work a bit in the end of the day. Like, I don't want to say like this roster was like not it yet. Like, it definitely did work to a degree. It just didn't finish through yet, because they did not win LCS with this roster. Yeah, they didn't win LCS with this roster, so it was not there yet. But like I said, it was good that they finally started identifying some of their issues with the rule number 1. Gravity, you know, this is a team that just threw in Keen, and then they had like some interesting players still like testing some of the American players, and that was great. I mean, it actually didn't turn out half bad. So Gravity was actually a pretty interesting introduction. Team 8, this is a team, again, kind of just like a whatever like team. They just threw a bunch of players in, and it was not the best. And just keep in mind, these are not actual Korean players. These are just American players, Canadian players who ethnicity is Korean. Team Coast, again, another just like, we just threw some shit in. This time it was like some EU players. So Jez has joined, Paler, and it's just like, who cares about any of this? This is not great. So again, this is like rule number, this is not even rule number 2. This is rule number 4. Just importing bad players. Like, that is just a thing. There are just rosters where people just imported really poorly. Dignitas, you know. Portage was an AD on what was it, like some like amateur LCK team, some LCK amateur team or whatever, and he was not half bad as an AD. Literally, he actually was not half bad as an AD. He played with Hui on that team too, but it was just not his time to come over, and they did not have the right players, like personality wise, what like to really work with these guys. And so it was just kind of like you just took on two players who couldn't communicate as much with the rest of them, and none of the three that you had as a whole, like Cloud Yugen, Ezini, Shifter, Crumbs, like these guys just, even Kiwi Kid, like just all their junglers, I feel like the vibes were just not exactly what you needed and how you wanted to like push this team forward. And so the team just fell flat. It was just pretty whatever. And you know, Team Impulse, this had Impact and Rush. So Impact was the next biggest like introduction as a player. Like he was, I mean, he was a world champion. Like no one even like thought this could be possible. And so Team Impulse was another sign of like, wow, we might actually start importing a lot more now, because we brought over this guy. This guy's this fucking good, and we brought over this guy. Like even Piglet joined too, right? And yeah, I think people took big note of that and said, okay, well, yeah, if it works, it works. I mean, Team Liquid literally got first in the summer standings. Yeah, they didn't end up, you know, making worlds or anything like that, but it was just the fact that they placed so highly for the first time that it's like, oh, this must work, right? And the thing is, some of these rosters just have a weird view of it. Like for Team Impulse, you know, Zhao Zhao was just like kind of in there. Like it's mostly just because he's with Rush, right, in the end, but it was like an okay roster. Like you have kind of like a stable bot lane, you have a commander in top lane, and like Rush will work well with Impact. And Zhao Zhao is just supposed to just do his job. So like it was not half bad. It wasn't a half bad idea in the end of the day what they did. And same with Team Liquid to a certain degree. Like Keith was in there just to kind of like help with Piglet, who was having like social issues, and same with like Phoenix. Like both these players were like pretty sporadic in terms of like their emotions. And actually, funny enough, the same is true for I Will Dominate and Quas. So this roster suffered from the personality issue, number one. I actually think they came in playing pretty decent. Like the Korean players actually played pretty decent as a whole. You know, so for the one-to-one issue, that actually surprisingly did better than expected. But because of number one, that interfered with number two, and so this roster just kind of fell apart in the long run. And TSM again made actually smart decisions where they brought in Santorin. So Bjergsen had 1 year, and then Santorin is a new, Danish player to work with Bjergsen. So they kind of got along already. And then Lustboy, kind of like, this is like kind of the exact Korean player you really want to get, which they kind of, I don't know. It was just, you remember the face off with Lustboy, right? Like, you know, with his hand over his face, and that was a big thing. And Lustboy really bought into the TSM like brand and working well with them. And then part of it was that they had Loco Doko as a coach who helped him kind of assimilate and understand American culture. And Loco Doko was already pretty well assimilated to Western culture in the first place, and that was a pretty great pickup by them to kind of curve that out. So TSM was, whether they're lucky, I think in this case they're actually this was pretty purposeful by them to make this move versus the last one with Bjergsen, compared to like, you know, just thinking, oh, like, is it gonna work or not? And this turned out really great for TSM, right? And you're going to see this with, this is basically rule 5 for LCS roster building, which they always do. If you're going to pick up a player from a different region, pick up a friend. That's like 2 Koreans. 2 Koreans always on a roster, never one. That was like the golden rule they kind of had. The thing is, Gravity actually went against that rule, which was interesting enough. And I don't remember if Keen was like already kind of assimilated to Western culture or anything like that, but yet it really did not turn out half bad for him. So unsure about that. And then Winter Fox was the biggest. Like this was the start of like, you know, a team who just picked up bad imports and one-to-one issues, personality issues. This just had everything written all over it. That was terrible. You go into 2016, and then now Cloud9 has Rush, who actually is a great brand fit for Cloud9. And then you have Jensen, who is again kind of following the footsteps of Bjergsen coming over. And all in all, the roster is pretty good, but there's just fundamental issues with it because the players just don't necessarily like work synergy wise completely well together. Meanwhile, CLG made finally that one switch where they're putting Hui in mid, got rid of Link, and then they brought in Stixxay, so they got rid of Doublelift, who was causing a bunch of issues. And now they've solved the first problem, the first rule, where okay, make sure like the personalities actually work well together and everything. And so now they did it. The 1-to-1 issue, not a big issue. Hui vibed with everyone. That worked. Okay, great. Number 2 worked. We didn't get a bad import. We knew he actually used the skills he was capable of to play the game. He was not as good as Bjergsen. That is just a fact. But he played the game in a different way that worked. And so CLG, after all this time, year 4, figured it out, and now they did really well, right? They did super well. Echo Fox, who knows what those guys are doing, right? Like, I mean, they put in KFO, and then they have Froggen, but like, who really, Froggen was just like a shell of his former self at this point, so it didn't really matter. It was just kind of a brand pickup. Renegades, like, you look at how many players they have. This is a team who just had absolutely no idea what the hell they're doing. Like, Alex Ich, after he was really terrible in the back end, Ninja. So just Renegades was just like, they had so much marketing, but that was it. It was just one of the teams, like most notable teams you could probably remember on just making horrible roster decisions. Dignitas, we have Smitty J, Kire. Like, who knows what the hell these guys are doing? Naturally, they sucked. It didn't do well. Goodbye. Team Impulse. Bebe Fang, Pairing, why? Like, again, we're just going into rule number 5. Was it rule number 4? Was it rule number 5? Just importing bad players because of importing sake. Terrible. Team Liquid, same issues that CLG had in former years. We have I Will Dominate, and then we picked up a really good, young jungler, Dardoch, and so he was incredibly interesting to have in the league. This is not the right team. Like, Phoenix and Piglet were all like still the same way. And so you have Lorelei and Smoothie, who are definitely more stable, but it just didn't make sense. He needed to be on a team that had a lot more, how would I say it, players that Dardoch would have to be forced to respect and also were calmer than him. So then he would just deal with it in a way. And it is just not the right fit. Dardoch, actually, you know what? I say that Dardoch say that way, but sometimes a player who like combats others constantly needs another person who actually will combat them back pretty well. And actually, one player I could think of that would do that every single time is Impact. But I don't think they ever cross paths. TSM. So they made more adjustments. This time they brought in Sven. Okay, a good player, veteran player, has some Warcaster, good vibes, Doublelift. All these guys at this point were in it to win it. They had a really clear path on what they wanted to do, and I think that was the best way to bind them together. They also so happen to just vibe well together. I mean, everyone remembers this 4 core of TSM with like good memories, and yeah, yeah, it just worked. It was good roster building. The only thing is they had Yellowstar, who just sucked and no one cared about. So Yellowstar, terrible pickup. Just one of those notable things TSM did, where they picked up a really big name player who they thought would just turn out because they had Bjergsen. Remember, Bjergsen just so happened to work out because they had the right players and everything. And the 1-to-1 issue does not always apparently work. And so they had Yellowstar and it didn't work. That sucked. Immortals was like picked off, Huni and Reignover from Fnatic, so they already knew those guys were going to be good together, and they were assimilated to Western culture. Rule number 6, get Korean players, get, Eastern players that have played in Europe first. That's literally a rule in some roster building. Like, because in the end of the day, if they get experience Europe, yeah, they're probably not going to have as much difficulty experiencing America compared to going from Korea to America, China to America, right? And they were fine. They were already used to things. They were okay. Cobalt, Wild Turtle, like calm players, it's like they'll do their thing. Adrian, kind of like pretty chill. So everyone was actually rather chill on this roster, and that actually was an issue. Really great instant synergy. This is the first team I worked on, and they were they just blew everyone apart. They had great, creativity and thinking about the game. But the thing is, they just didn't have a player who pushed them hard enough. I mean, if whether you want to put that as rule number 7 or whatever, but you do need someone who actually will contest others and drive the game forward more. And that, again, that's something that Impact is incredibly good with. So if you ever need a player like that, you just get Impact, literally. With Team Liquid, they had Phoenix, Piglet, Dardoch. Like, having too many players like this will create a huge mess. Having too many calm players, a mess. So like, you need a good mix, and you don't have to necessarily have someone like those guys, like what Impact, like Double F, who like constantly want to insert things, but it helps at times. And then Energy, this is just another like play on like, oh, let's pick up GBM from Janair, Shrimp, Impact, and then let's just pray to God it works. It didn't. Go to 2017. Cloud9 now finally picks up Impact. They keep Jensen, who's just kind of, he plays well. He's a little bit of a bot, but he plays well. They have a newcomer contracts, and this is where I'm like, holy shit, Cloud9 did it. So Cloud9, great initial roster, made some weird changes because they just felt like they had to make some changes. Then they learned their lesson from that, and then they slam it here by picking up Smoothie, who's a much more stable like laner to be with Sneaky. Jensen's already handling himself. We have a young gun jungler, and then we have Impact on the top lane who can keep it all together. Like, great. CLG ran it again. Great. It worked. It literally worked. Phoenix won. This was cool because Anori came in and he did really well. And there's certain shades of where, like, Ryu and Arrow both kind of work. The rule of 2 Koreans from West, though Arrow didn't come from the West, right? He just came from KT. But Rio did come from H2K, and it didn't turn out bad for him, really. It really did not. Like, yeah, like, they didn't do as well in the summer split, but the spring split, yeah, like, everyone really remembers that. Dignitas, they brought in a really good player Someday, and he actually did perform. And then you threw in a bunch of other Korean players who were just whatever, and the team was just whatever. And also, you had a terrible bot lane. So, Dignitas was in the phase of where I'm going to grab a really good player, and I'm going to surround him with bad players. And, yeah, I don't know what the hell we're doing. FlyQuest, this is just, C9 2.0, and obviously they were, like, whatever. Like, incredibly whatever. Immortals, now we have Dardoch with Flame, Pobelter, Cody, and Olay. And the problem was just that, they have the 2 Koreans. Olay and Cody did eventually get to grow and learn together and actually work well as a duo. That took time, but they actually did work through it, and Olay ended up being a pretty good pickup. But Dardoch just combated everyone. No one combated Dardoch, he just combated everyone. And because of that, it just turned into a huge mess. And once they threw in Xmini had a better way at talking to people about the game, and that ended up being really good for him. And funny enough, Dardoch switched to CLG in summer too, so it's just a jungler swap. And it worked at first for CLG, but they didn't go anywhere with Dardoch. In the end of the day, they didn't go anywhere with Dardoch. Like, they did surprisingly well, I'll say that, but it just was not the same. And CLG got rid of Xfinity because they just thought, well, he didn't have the best spring split. Let's just get rid of him. But that was a dumb idea. And then Team Liquid, they're still trying to figure out if they can keep Piglet or not. Rainover is like a decent addition towards keeping things like, kind of calm. But the problem is, everyone is calm. No one can combat Piglet. And in some ways, it might not even be just that everyone's calm. It might just be the fact that Piglet just wasn't not a good vibe for most of these teams. Because Rainover was a good jungler, right? Oh, you know what? Actually, sorry. The main issue I had with this roster, actually, it's not the fact that like Piglet's surrounded by a bunch of calm players or not. It's the fact that Rainover is surrounded by a bunch of players who just suck. Like, Piglet and Matt were okay, right? Like, they were an okay, like, duo, but it was not, like, the best, per se. And Golden Glue and Lorlo just weren't that great. They really just were not that good. So, he had his solo laners, whereas before he had Pobelter and Huni, right? And that was way easier to play with than compared to these two. And his whole point is to be like a control-based jungler. It's not like he's like some overtaking godlike jungler. So that didn't turn out that well for Team Liquid. That was more so just not even like a personality issue. It was more so just, does your roster have firepower? I don't know, rule number 7. Does your roster have firepower? Because if your roster doesn't, you're not going anywhere. Like, this is a thing. 2018. 100 Thieves comes in, Someday Ryu. But we have Cody and Afro, which was kind of like a weird throw-in, and same with Meteos. So the roster ended up doing really well. Like, the roster looks pretty weird. Like, thinking that these players are actually going to work well together in the end. And it somehow worked for regular split, but they got clobbered by TL both finals. Like, it was not even close. And if you look at the TL roster, now this is where it gets interesting, because Team Immortals died, and so they brought in Impact Smithy. You know, already just like, okay, well, these two guys know what the hell they're doing. Pole Belter just handles his thing in mid, and then double lift Olay. And now Olay was better as a big brother compared to Olay worked really well as a big brother to Cody, but the second that Doublelift takes over that role and then constantly harps on him, it didn't work at all. And so that just became a huge collapse point. So TL, while they won pretty easily both LCS splits for like the playoffs, for grand finals, they didn't do much internationally at all. C9 now makes another change where it's like, okay, now we have Sven and, you know, Jensen together. You know, we kept the good bot lane, and then we added a young gun, you know, top laner, Licorice, and it was fine. It worked well, but unfortunately this year, Team Liquid was just way better, right? Clutch Gaming, you know, they threw in Lyra for Bivin. Like, okay. I mean, like, it was fine. I mean, Apollo Hako was a really great find, and Solo was okay. But Lyra was just kind of like there. Like, it just, like, he was a good jungler, but it just didn't really, the rule of 2, you know, like, does he really mesh with everyone enough? And personally, not exactly. CLG, you know, Darshan, Reignover, Hui, Stixxay, Biofrost, like, it's another, like, we gotta vibe together and do well together kind of situation, but at this point, Reignover was not doing as well, Hui was not doing as well, and even though their bot lane was, like, solid, it just didn't have the same effect, you know? It just was not the same effect. And sometimes, you know, you look at a roster on paper, and it's like, this roster could do decent, and, I mean, rule number 8, sometimes it just doesn't work. It really, like, literally, sometimes it just doesn't work. It's whatever it may be, you know, as much as you hope that it's going to work well and do well, sometimes it just doesn't happen. And there was a lot of teams coming into this year that just had a lot of firepower. Like, compared to when they were testing, like, their other rosters in the 2016 and 2017, and this year, you know, look at Cloud9, look at 100 Thieves, look at TSM, look at TL. Well, TSM was not so much, right? But it's still a decent team, right? Like, there's just a lot of firepower coming in, and so this roster just did not operate well enough as a team to overcome that. And it is what it is. Even Echo Fox, funny enough, even Echo Fox to a degree, Huni, Phoenix, you know, we're trying Dardoch again. Again, there's very clear issues with this team, but you can see that they have reasonable players. FlyQuest. They kept Flame, but now we're like messing around with junglers, messing around with mid laners. They don't really know what the hell they want to do or what they want to do. So that was a huge mess. Golden Guardians, just no firepower. Who gives a shit? Horrible team design. Like, never do that. Optic Gaming. It was interesting. It was just not well ran. Like, this is a roster that, kind of like CLG, it just didn't work in the end. But I think with the right structure and coaches, it actually could have done better. And then, of course, TSM, they threw in Mike Young. They had Bjergsen, but the thing is, it's Mike Young with a bot lane who just will keep harping and talking about the game all the time. And I don't know if anyone was big brother to Mike Young on this team, but he did not look like he had a big brother on that team, so did not turn the best. 2019. You know, Cloud9 at this point, they put in Niski, and I thought that was a great change in terms of just Jensen was fine, but I think Jensen's a bit of a bot. Niski works really well with the team, so this kind of unlocked Licorice a lot more compared to last year. And you know, they kind of kept the same, just like there was no big firepower in the support roles that they were having, but they were doing pretty well. And so you kept your stable ball lane, and then you got to unlock Licorice more, and it was a really fun team to watch. It was a really fun team. FlyQuest, they tried Santorin, and that was nice to see him come back from the Challenger League. Challenger League, and they threw in Viper. So this team was actually really interesting because JJ, if you look at JJ now in Academy, he is definitely better than how he was in LCS back then. And JJ just had some issues going on at the time, I believe. But to me, like, this roster definitely could have grown and become more the following year. Like, it was really interesting. I think Viper also had some issues pop up on his side about losing, like, you know, losing faith in, like, his play and everything. But I think this was a really interesting roster, and I think they could have gone more with this. I think they just did not necessarily have the right structure, the right coaching staff to build upon this more. I think that's the, like, one of the few things you're going to see rule number 9 is just what structure they have, like who is actually helping the team that on paper can actually work, but you just, like, it's just not the right fit for who the coaches are or whatever. And I felt like that was the case for this roster. Golden Guardians, you know, it was a better idea by them, but it's still just like, we just have Froggen, okay? We have definitely Olate, okay? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Opposite Gaming, you know, we have Crown, cool. We have Asta, cool. Like, you know, just again, we're just throwing random shit at the paper. Who gives a shit? Team Liquid, we get it. We get Jensen, and we get Core JJ coming off a world championship. So now we have two players who are incredibly confident in themselves because they've literally won everything, Impact and Core JJ. So Doublelift has to respect them and understand them. Smithy has just been a consistent monster. And then Jensen just handles himself. Like, he just has to slot in and he's fine. So this roster, again, became just ridiculous. Just a ridiculous roster. And even though TSM made some improvements where it's like, okay, we have Broken Blade, right? And then we switched out Mithy so we didn't have so much volatility in the bond lane. So now we have Sven, Smoothie. Okay, not bad. But they didn't really vibe the best together, per se. And Acadian, while he could work, there's a bunch of big personalities in here, and he might just not have been the right fit in the end of the day. So that didn't turn out the best. And, well, CLG, I mean, they kind of lost track on whatever the hell they're doing. They did do better in the summer, and I will say that's credit to the fact that they actually started getting their shit together as a team, but it was a little weird. You go into 2020, now 100 Thieves is like bringing in, you know, now 100 Thieves at this point is kind of like, they're still messing around, you know, with just flipping various players. Like, I mean, like, this roster, I don't even know if I even talked about this roster then. Like, this is the roster had Bang. Like, we just imported Bang, and then we had Hui, and we just thought it was gonna work, but we had terrible junglers. Like, it's like, again, it's just stuff that just doesn't make any sense. And this is a roster again where it's just like, you're lacking in firepower, but you have some really good players. You have Someday. Like, you have Someday, and then you have some players who are just like kind of there, and it just didn't slot in the best. FlyQuest, you know, this is the team that actually brought in, so they got PoE, they got Wild Turtle and Ignar, so it's like, okay, this is a pretty, like, Ignar actually drives the game, so that's really good for the team because they have PoE. Santorin, they have Wild Turtle handle themselves. And Viper just couldn't figure it out, couldn't fit in well enough with the team in the end of the day. And I wish it worked that better for him because, honestly, this is a very, like, if he actually could play well with this team, it would have been so good. Honestly, it actually have been really good. But it just didn't work out that way. And so they picked up Solo in the middle of it and ended up working decent for them. They went to finals both times, and lost. But it's a case of where I wonder what could happen differently, you know, if whatever the case is, that player got better help. They could figure out how to, like, you know, just treat some of the nerves or, like, just drop and play that occurs. Because losing Viper kind of sucked in a lot of ways. Like, Viper actually could have been a fun player to have in the league, but it just didn't happen. Golden Guardians, you know, the roster had like Hanser, Closer, they picked up FBI, like, cool. We got some good players. You know, they did decent. Immortals. We have Soaz Ica. Who the fuck cares about those guys? Like, what the hell are we doing? We have Team Liquid, who now have Broxa from Fnatic, and it's like, oh, he's gonna be good. 1-to-1 issue. He did terrible. Jensen, he's just there. And Double F kind of like became a sore spot with how the team was, so they fit in Tactical, who ended up making a big improvement to the team's, you know, environment. Dignitas, again, just more like, why is Froggen still jumping around with people? Johnson was actually a very capable young AD to be interesting to watch, but it was just not a great roster to be on for him. CLG, I don't know what the hell they're doing. There's a lot of rosters that CLG had that just started becoming like a complete mess, because for me, you know, this roster is also kind of a mess that they have here. But it starts from here, because I feel like this, whatever they had here was still not the worst. It was a really tough year, but it was just not the worst year. And then they just started trying random shit without like enough purpose, and it just gets like weirder and weirder as the years go by. And before you know it, they're done. Like, they're toast, they're out. TSM, you know, Dardoch is here. We have Broken Blade Bjergsen, really great solo lanes. Kabe, Biofrost, like we brought in Kabe, and it's like just didn't perform as well. And it's just, I don't know. They tried a whole bunch of young like they really did try a bunch of young talent, but I feel like for TSM, as the years go by, the more and more I felt like whatever the initial ideas they had going on, which were actually rather good and well thought, like probably seemed well thought out, makes it seem like it was more just lucky and just like we just pulled in really good players and they so happened to work, and that was it. Like, it was just the sake of just being lucky, and the players just worked well together somehow, and that was them. Like, Evil Geniuses, Zazel, Kumo, but we still kept Bang. Like, they did fine, but like it was super weird. And then Cloud9, you know, we have Sven and Vulcan, like really good roster, and like they did kill it. You know, they went 17-1. They tied the best record in LCS ever, 17-1. But eventually, you know, they felt like it was just not enough. Whatever happened with like Niski between them, I don't know, but they just tossed him out. And I thought this was not a bad change that they did in the end, because like Sneaky decided to stop playing, I believe. Or maybe they wanted to switch out Sneaky, they wanted more firepower, so they picked up Sven. It was not bad. It was not a bad idea. And so I feel like historically, Cloud9 came in as is, made a few mistakes, and then kind of progressively tuned things up in a good way. TSM came in really good and kept staying mostly good until the later years, where it started just fell apart, and you kind of realized it was just all luck in the end. Maybe maybe it was just all luck. FlyQuest has the most like volatility in terms of what they're doing. Like they take a lot of big risks on their rosters, and they can work. They can kind of work. You can see the reasoning behind it, but like it just doesn't always just come together. CLG just progressively gets worse because they kind of just lose themselves. Dignitas, no idea what the fuck they're doing. Just absolutely no idea what they're doing. 100 Thieves, just they're always like on the cusp of maybe thinking of like having like a few good players and thinking that what they have is right, but it's just not working. You know, 2021, you know, 100 Thieves, now they have Demonte, Closer someday, FBI, Hui, you know, like this is the 100 Thieves roster that kind of dominated for a bit, and it worked well. I mean, Closer helped the lead. Someday was not a leader, so Closer helped lead and guide the team. Hui joined in a bit, and Demonte was like being a front figure. You know, it worked. This was actually finally like, okay, finally we figured it out. We surrounded Someday with better players and players who actually want to lead the game, take it like control. Even though our best player like doesn't want to do that, like great, Cloud9, we threw in perks. We have fucking perks, and this guy sucked. This guy was shit. 1-to-1 issue. Rule number 3. It was just so bad. Fudge was amazing. I mean, Okay, and don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna say, okay, I should say right now, it's not like Perks was like the worst. It was just for what he's getting paid, he was bad. Okay, for what he's getting paid, he was bad. Fudge, phenomenal pickup. You know, especially for his first year, he was literally one of their best players in international. CLG, again, I told you already, this getting worse and worse. Dignitas, who knows what the fuck they're doing. Evil Genius, like we have definitely now. Like, what are we doing? Like there's really good ideas on this EG roster, but then you just throw in Deathly and it's like this makes no sense. So it's like it's getting carried. The team's getting carried, but because AD is such an important position, in the end of the day, you can't win if your AD is just complete dog shit or doesn't know how to play the game like for what the team is. FlyQuest, you know, Halifax finally gets his opportunity. This is one of the players who suffered from contract issues because of Jack, and I mean that's just how Jack did things with his academy players, with his good prospects. Like he made it so like you had to pay a ton of money to buy them out and things like that, and it was a really terrible. It was really bad that he did that because that really fucked over a bunch of players who definitely had potential to play in the league. And also the fact that because teams were importing so much, there was definitely like good talent available to try, but all the teams were scared because they constantly wanted to do the arms race versus everyone else. And so that's like kind of what I'm getting at while I'm talking about these rosters and the issues they've had. And I probably should have been talking about this a little bit more, but it's just the fact that no one is just like taking enough responsibility on the fact that yes, we have shareholders, we want to make a big splash at times and things like that. But you need to see the future in the next 2 to 5 years, and like picking up a player every other year to just like, oh, this guy's really good, we'll pick him up and pay him a lot of money. Like that's just not going to do anything. Like eventually, like it's just not going to work. Like, the money's going to run out because none of these teams are even making money at this point. So all of them should have realized it, but none of them did. So FlyQuest, you know, they had a really good young talent in Johnson, but the support players they chose didn't really work the best with Johnson. Johnson really needed a support who was like Core JJ. Like he needed a player like Core JJ who was gonna be big brother to Johnson and have Johnson's full respect. And if they were able to pay and get someone like that, Johnson would have turned out really well. Like Johnson worked decent with Afro, but Afro actually doesn't like being a big brother. He doesn't. And funny enough, I'm pretty sure they get him the next year. They get Afro the next year with Johnson, but again, Afro actually really isn't like that. He gives off the perception that he is like that, but he's not like that. Palafox did decent. Jose was a really cool pickup at the time because he was a rather good player, honestly. Like solo queue player, he's really good mechanically. But and in Licorice we had Licorice, and Licorice was not a leader. Like he was a good player on C9, but that's because the C9 roster just made sense with him, you know? Like Niski was a big component towards unlocking Licorice and improving that situation. Halifax was not exactly like that per se, and Jose was still learning LCS, so there was a lot of issues, and Licorice just could not be used in the same way. He did way better on Golden Guardians, and yeah, it's like we took some risks on FlyQuest, but it was not the best ideas, and so it fell flat. Immortals, you know, again, trying to make a team that kind of just like meshes well together and can do their thing, and it was like an okay team, but it fell flat. Team Liquid, you know, this is now where we start getting into some of these super incredible like rosters, right? You know, like we have fucking Core JJ, Jensen, Santorin, Alfari, like holy shit, we have Alfari, like a lot of firepower, but just with Alfari and Jensen, like they just don't really add, like I feel like they just don't add the right pieces towards your team environment. And so you have Tactical and Core JJ just doing their thing, you have Santorin there, and then it's like, what the hell are we doing? TSM, you know, we have Huni, Speaka, PoE, Lost, Sword Art. Like Lost got the bump over Double Lift, which was not bad, but Sword Art came in, high expectations, $6 million, did terrible. 1-to-1 issue, just not thinking thoroughly on it, and like Sword Art was probably the worst pickup in LCS history ever. And again, this is where TSM just doesn't know what the hell they're doing. 2022, you know, this is where like Cloud9, now they're taking a book from Team Liquid, like, okay, let's get an overpower, like a really powerful like top laner. Let's get Summit, and then we threw Fudge in mid, and it was like, okay. Berserker was a great pickup in the end of the day, and they kept him, which was great, but now they're starting to get lost. Now they're getting lost in the sauce, you know? Like, at this point, like, they start getting a little bit lost here in the first place by throwing in perks, but now we're like, what are we doing with mid lane? Like, they just kind of, like, just forgot what was good and what wasn't. And with CLG, you know, they tried running more... They started trying to adjust towards a better... How do I say it? A better set of players that work together and also are not going to break the bank. So Palafox, cool, you know, Dokla, Contracts, Luger, you know, Hume. This was the start of a team that actually finally accepted their situation and had to, because they ran out of money, because some of these teams were running out of money, they decided to dig deep and just pick up what is like the best, cheapest talent we can get. And that is the start of where, you know, where we are now. This is what kind of started driving towards that sake. So CLG made some interesting choices here, and it was actually a really great summer split by them, and that turned the ball forward. Dignitas, really great pickup by River, but like the rest is like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, you throw in Fake God, but Fake God is now playing with like Neo, Blue, like it just, he needed other players to be introduced to, or former teammates or something, to kind of help him mesh in better, but it just was not great. Evil Geniuses, you know, obviously Impact inspired JoJo, Danny, Vulcan. Like, this was a pretty well-designed team in that Impact inspired really drive the game the entire time. JoJo is a young gun player with a really big ball, so he's going to be fine all the time. And then Danny has a big brother support player who's well-experienced, who can guide him. Like, it was good. It was a good roster. FlyQuest, you know, again, like I already talked about the Johnson Afro thing, and Takui was like one of those players where it's like, it's just a personality issue and how he fits with the team. In the end of the day, he's a great player, but it just, and he really was a great player, but it just, there's too many things going on. Golden Guardians, an okay team, but it was an okay. It was an okay team. Immortals, you know, it was better. It was a better attempt, I guess, but still a lot of stuff that just didn't make sense. Team Liquid, you know, they do another. Again, this is where Team Liquid starts throwing shit at the wall, like big bucks at the wall, and it's just like, why is it not working? Why is it not working? And I mean, that's because you. I don't know. Honestly, I don't even know what the issue was with this team in the end of the day. Like Blippo, Santorin, Bjergsen, Hans, Sama, Core JJ. Like, this roster should literally just peak at number 1 each time and be highly competitive. But whatever the case is, they just fell flat. Like, yeah, they had good score lines for like the regular seasons, but it just kind of fell flat. And TSM, I mean, this is where like Takeover was a really good talent to bring over, but then Spica, like just. Spica's actually okay for the sake. Same with Huni to a degree. But the supports were just so terrible. So terrible for the team environment. And the team environment overall with like all the drama and everything, just not great. You go into 2023, you know, 100 Thieves, they tried Tenacity. This is like them actually trying to introduce their own young talent. Same with Busio. And I'm pretty sure Tenacity didn't last. Did he actually get the full nod for spring? I don't remember. I could have sworn they brought in Someday, like, instantly, and that was it. Like, that was literally it. FlyQuest, and I already talked about this. This was them trying to some really big name players, but the thing is the personality issue where, while it works, all the players can talk to each other, but Viklet actually can't handle the intensity of some of these guys, even Winsome to a degree. Same with Ayla. And so that was an underestimation when it's like, oh, we just got some really fucking killer players, but he didn't realize that it was actually going to be this bad with the rest, so it just fell apart. Golden Guardians, River Gory, really cool, but actually, no, I'm not even going to say but. It was actually a pretty cool fucking roster. Like, this roster did really well, and people were really happy about it. Gory kind of slouched a bit by the end, which sucked, but it was a pretty good attempt of a roster, you know. And we get to Immortals, Revenge, Kenvi, Ablaze, Bololo, Tactical, Fleshy. Fleshy actually is a good talent, but it just was not the right fit in the end with how the rest of the players are. Like, if you're gonna be a rookie, you want to make sure you got like guys who are really solid to make things easier for you. If it's a really like chaotic or just like people get too emotional or people just can't perform consistently, like things just get kind of hard for you to improve at times. Team Liquid, you know, still fucking around with like their stuff. Like Harry should never been promoted. Yeon was okay, but Harry probably should never been promoted. And yeah, I don't know, that turned into a shit fest. TSM, we're just doing more dumb things. We don't know what the hell we're doing. Evil Geniuses, you know, we're trying a different variation of what we had before, and it was not half bad, but now it's like without impact, like Inspire just dominates the conversation completely, and it just turns into a huge issue. Dignitas, you know, it was a better roster, and you look at it, it's like, well, Armut, Santorin, Jensen, but the case is just you just don't have anyone who wants to take enough responsibility over what's happening. Like Tomo won't, because Tomo was like a rookie, and Biofrost wasn't like that, so like there was no one who really wanted to just take lead. So yeah, the roster fell super flat. And of course, CLG with Energy, yeah, this is like the big team that really showed that you don't need to spend big bucks to win. You can have players who are pretty reasonable, who can improve, because players can definitely improve. Dokla showed that, Contract showed that all through Academy, going back into Academy and showing they're better than what they are. And this was it. This was the team to really look at. Like, this was like, holy shit, okay. Like, because at this point, you know, guys, I know we've been talking a long time, but if you look at all the rosters I've shown so far, and all the things I've talked about with like various personality issues, one-to-ones, not having the two players like rule, whatever the case you want to have, whatever rule you want to call out, whatever structure issue you have, at the end of the day, you're not going to have as many personality issues per se when you're getting guys all from the same region, from all the same pool. Like, I'm going to be able to relate a lot better with other players from the Midwest. Who would have guessed? You know, like, this is just such a small thing, but like, it's literally true. It's just an easier bonding moment with that person. The same would be the case if you ever go out, and then let's say I go out to LA and I start talking to people and I found out someone's from Chicago. Guess what? I'm instantly going to be having better conversations with that person, probably than other people, just because we have something to connect to. Like, you're going to literally feel more connected to that person because you know the same things. So like, that is a big driving point for these guys. It's not even necessarily that they were, how would I say it? It's not necessarily that they were from the same place. It's the fact that they came from the same position in life. You know, a lot of these guys were like well-regarded players, but kind of like outcasts, like just kind of like, well, I'm just gonna import this better player, right? And so like a little chip on their shoulder. And so a lot of them had that, and it just worked really well going together, even though it was like kind of a mess. Like, personality wise, it actually is not as great as you think, but they did end up working pretty well together. And it's Cloud9, you know, we already know, like, MNA's, Diplex, like, the roster was good. The roster definitely had its like weight and like firepower, and that's what kind of drove it to being better than everyone else. And a key point was the fact that they had someone like Sven who could contest people and also be Big Brother the Berserker, and like in a good way, in a really good way. Because guess what? Where was it? Winsome couldn't do that with Berserker. Winsome couldn't do that at all. Sven could, and that was something that was really needed, and that's something that I think bot laners like really need to notice. It's like, you need that guy who can do that. Prince was not that with Winsome or Ayla. Prince just like attacked them. It's not being a big brother. 2024, finally the last year, guys. We're almost at an hour. I'm sorry about this, but this is where finally, from that CLG, that energy situation, and the cash is finally gone, that now all the imports start falling away a little bit. Of course, granted, we're going to see a shit ton of imports still, but the imports feel at least a little bit more purposeful. So for C9, you know, we kept Berserker, we have Fudge, we have JoJo. So really, they didn't really change much of their imports at all. and they brought into some big talent. Now the thing is, I just think this team just was not well structured, managed, because on paper they're really good, right? They're really good. I think just on paper they just don't make sense, and I think Blabber plays for himself way too much, and JoJo wants to play for himself a lot more too. And so it would require JoJo to kind of adjust how he plays to fit Blabber's play style, and that just was not happening. And then Vulcan has just been on, the down low for a while, so I think they actually do miss Sven as support. I really do. I think they actually miss Sven as support because he kind of kept things in line. Look at 100 Thieves. This was a really great idea by them in that they have River. River is the big brother to everyone because everyone are basically like rookies, and he plays super well. A lot of pressure on him, and he can handle it. Like it actually works for him. And the rookies are really, I don't know what the word is, but they're very joyful playing with each other. Like they hype each other up. They are literally like kids in a way. Meech is not the same personality as Quid and Sniper, but their soul laners really do get along super well. And you can see in their play that they're incredibly confident in that. Meech and Ayla is not actually a good pairing because Ayla is not actually a good laner. I mean, he can be responsible in talking to Meech, but the problem is his play doesn't back him up, so it's not really the best. So they probably would have to make a change in support to really like finalize this roster being good, but until then, it'll be okay. Dignitas, XU actually had okay, like Rich is a very good top laner, and Dove is like just fine, not crazy good or anything. And then they had Tomo and Isles. Now their bot line suffered a lot of issues, but they were growing together. XQ had some issues, but it was not a bad attempt. It was not a bad attempt to them in that I think if XQ had, I mean, if it was possible to have, players that were willing to talk to him and drive the game in a certain way, that maybe he could have done better. But if you did that case, you probably could not run Tomo, because a lot of the times when you have like a pretty fresh rookie, like unless he's like a super rookie, you kind of need to surround him by a lot of stable players. Like 100 Thieves I thought was not going to do nearly as good because, yeah, like it's just River. Like that was a big risk, and the team ended up doing a lot better. Yeah, they ended up dying out in playoffs because, like, yeah, their playstyle was extremely one-dimensional, but, like, if you look at FlyQuest, they have like, Whippo Inspired, this is just, like, Impact and Inspired, who drove the game entirely, and then Jensen's just randomly there, and Master Busio. The only thing is, these guys were so stable, Master Busio were able to, like, play the way they wanted to play, really aggressive and everything, and learn a lot, and they are getting better, and if they can get a handle on things, they will actually be a really good bot lane. It's just Jensen didn't really help the team much at all. So like Jensen was like, even though he's a veteran, it was just not the right veteran. Immortals, Castle, Armeo, Mask, Tactical Olay. Mask does have experience. Same with Castle to the degree. It's just not in the major league. And Mask did great. Castle did pretty good too. Their soul laners ended up doing rather well. It's just, whatever the case is, they just didn't have enough confidence in each other to take fights and play them out. So if you can't win fights, you can't win games. Energy, it's mostly the same roster except you have Hui in here. And at this point, whatever like structure changes that occurred, the team's just not the same. Like there's a lot of stupid shit happening in these games by them. And it's just like, you literally can count on them to make mistakes. I don't know what happened, but whatever the case is, they're just losing their mojo. Also, Dokla was way worse. So I thought they were going to make a replacement in summer, but they did not. Shopify, Fake God, but it's like, again, we're trying Fake God again after he was in the amateur academy season. And I'll admit, he actually does have some players who can like kind of see things through, like with Insanity. And he has Zazel too. So like literally this roster should be better for him to work through, but he was still the weakest player. So at this point, this is just kind of like a bust. It's just like, maybe they should have tried a different player than him. Team Liquid, this turned out really well. They had 3 Korean players. Core JJ, Impact all see the game the same way, essentially. And most importantly, APA is not the best mid laner, but he actually is really good at handling pressure, taking on pressure, and pushing through it. And Impact and Core JJ and Umpty are all pretty. They're pretty straightforward, like blunt feedback kind of people, and APA can handle it. And so there's not a lot of mid laners who can actually do that or typically do that. And so he, like, personality wise, this was a case where it was just like, wow, we actually have a guy who could actually handle this. And even though, like, he's not the best, he's able to grow and learn the system from them. And yeah, it was really good. And Yeon saw that. Yeon struggled in the previous year because, to me, he didn't really have a good partner in crime. You know, like, Harry was just, like, kind of suffering greatly. And so he couldn't really lean on that. Like, Summit was not really the same as Impact. And I think seeing APA being able to take the brunt of it and focus on it and push through it, I think that is actually really motivating. And so I think APA ended up being such a huge pickup for making Yeon more confident and playing better. Honestly, I feel like just that alone, that it was a big gamble to trust that APA would somehow work out for this. But if they knew that that kind of personality of his, that determination would really wire it in, bravo. So yeah, I mean, looking through the years, guys, you know I went through like a ton of rosters each year, but I think the main thing I can really say is that in the beginning and the early years of LCS, you know, we had a lot of focus on just synergy, liking each other, and just playing the game for each other kind of situations, you know? And without structure, there was like the risk of where you might like someone, but then when you actually play the game and money's on the line, like, you turn into a bad person and you have no one who can really reel that in, and it turns into a huge shit fest. And that's how you had teams like CLG, you know, who took too long to figure out things out. You have some teams who got it right away from just pure luck. And then when we hit into the franchise league, you know, we just started importing players who just didn't really, how would I say it? You imported players who either were good, but were not good brothers to improve the talent from NA that was coming through to join them. Whether it's like a Cadian or whatever, a Johnson, like, you were just not taking on the right players who could actually build those players up. So over the years, we've had import players who just come and go, whether they're really good or not. You know, they just didn't really add much to the other players in our pool. And, like, you know, with Rich and XU, I doubt anything happened well with that. And so you brought in players who don't really add on to your rookie NA players, North American players, and you didn't, whether it's your coaches assisting with it or the other players assisting, whatever the case is. And so you lost out on some really good talent. There really was some really good talent in North America that just fell through. And now at this point where we are now, there's less talent to pick out from. Yes, there's some players that was still you're going to be interested in to seeing and wanting to, like, move through now, because especially because teams are going to be actively looking for players a bit more, only because, yeah, like, they don't want to pay a lot. Like, literally, it took us to lose a bulk of the funding to realize, wow, maybe we have to do it. And now they're taking responsibilities over what happened in the end. And that's just it's just sad. It's really just sad. So yeah, that's where LCS is now, guys. Like, at this point, a lot of players have already gave up their dreams, moved on. They're going to college instead and playing League there and not really trying to care for playing in LCS. The LCS dream is just not really a big thing. It's going to take some years for LCS to recover, and if it doesn't, that's probably it. Like, if you just keep reusing the same talent, or your talent just comes in and you don't know how to properly build around it, there's nothing else to it. And I hope looking through these years really does shed light on just how many mistakes and kind of weird choices teams made. Especially teams who just threw shit at the wall for no reason. Like, there was just way too much there's just way too much. There is just too much bad stuff happening. I don't know. This is just my rant. This is my rant on LCS rosters throughout the years. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. And next time, I'm going to try to talk about... Ooh. I probably will try to talk about the upcoming split, if I can. If I can get enough of the information on all the rosters and everything, that's what I'm going to talk about next. All right. See you guys.